Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm the Sandman and I'm on my own this week because Alfred Farius actually became a father yesterday as of the day of recording and has quite frankly shown a shocking lack of commitment in the last 24 hours. Fortunately though, with him gone, there will be no jokes about the Dark Angels being traitors because the Dark Angels are actually my beloved Space Marine faction. But nevertheless, the aim of this video is to teach you how to beat them, so we don't just cover the gotchas but also the key plays and top combos that you're likely to see. The aim of this video is to make sure that you don't have to read the entire Dark Angel supplement in order to beat them. The really cool thing about collecting Dark Angels is that you get 3 factions in one, and so I have split this video up into 3 sections: the Greenwing section, the Ravenwing section, and the Deathwing section. So let's jump straight in then to the Greenwing. Now most things in the Greenwing are going to affect things in the Ravenwing and Deathwing also, but I have split them out for ease. So there are 2 parts to the Dark Angels chapter tactic. Number 1 is that they don't have to take combat attrition tests. So this means that only one model can ever run from them failing morale, which is really nice. The second part is that they get +1 to hit when they stand still. So this is going to have an obvious effect, which is that if you have vehicles that are sitting back, for example, you might want to keep them standing still so that they can hit on 2s. Awesome. However, it also works really well with the Greenwing specific doctrine, and this happens in the tactical doctrine. And what it means is that infantry, except Deathwing, can shoot rapid fire and assault weapons in combat, but they shoot at a BS of 5, which then becomes a 4 effectively because of the +1 to hit. And so essentially, Greenwing can shoot when they're in combat. Really awesome. The other thing to note about this chapter tactic is that if you charge a Dark Angels unit but you fail to kill it, when it strikes you back it will still get the +1 to hit because it hasn't moved this turn. And just to note here that Games Workshop haven't forgotten about Deathwing and Ravenwing, but they do in fact have their own doctrines, so it doesn't matter what turn of the game you're in, there is always a portion of the Dark Angels army that is getting the benefits of a super doctrine. So let's move on then to some stratagems that can affect the whole army. So we have intractable, which means that a unit can fall back and shoot. It also removes the penalty for Deathwing, which we'll discuss later. Then we have line unbreakable, and this can be devastating versus horde armies. So it can be used on an infantry unit and means that that infantry unit can only be targeted by models within engagement range of it, which essentially means that you can't fight with models in the second rank, because normally you can fight with models within half an inch of models within half an inch. So make sure when you're playing against these Dark Angels infantry units that you properly utilize your charge move and then your pile-ins to make sure you can surround that unit. And then finally, we have to mention Weapons of the Dark Age. It's back in 9th edition. It's always incredibly good. It is +1 damage to plasma weapons. With how good plasma inceptors are right now, they can kill pretty much anything. They're just so incredibly good. Do everything you can to screen out that unit and just be careful. So then let's just talk about the Warlord traits that are available to any of the Dark Angels units. So the ones that we like are Fury of the Lion, and this is +1 strength for units within 6 inches if that Warlord was charged or heroically intervened. We have Stubborn Tenacity, and this means that the Warlord can hang around after you've killed him, at least until the end of the turn, and this can mean that they can still fight. It means that they can still block you if you're trying to move through to an objective. There's lots of utility for a unit with this Warlord trait. We have Decisive Tactician. +1 to advance and charge is always going to be super useful, especially for an army that has really great deep striking units. And we have a 6-inch heroic intervention, and we know how good this is. You put that on a Judiciar, that all of a sudden means you have a much better chance of using the Judiciar's Fight Last ability. So we'll mention most of the relics as they come up organically, but I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Eye of the Unseen. This is a 6-inch aura of -1 leadership, and it also means that characters within engagement range will fight last. Okay, so that's most of the Greenwing specific stuff we wanted to cover, but most of the power in this book comes from Ravenwing and Deathwing. So for Ravenwing, although it's not their chapter tactic, if you do have the Dark Angels chapter tactic, you can get access to Jink for your Ravenwing units, and this gives them a 5-up invulnerable save unless they don't move. If they stay stationary, they actually do lose that invulnerable save, but it's pretty easy to keep, and you can actually increase it to a 4-up invulnerable save if they advance. And you'll be happy to hear that they can advance and fire any weapon in the Devastator Doctrine, but they do count all their weapons at that point as being assault weapons, but still a very worthwhile trade, I think you'd agree, and actually they can just give any of the Ravenwing vehicles a 4-up invulnerable save anyway. All of this is going to make the Ravenwing really tough to shift from ranged attacks, so you really want to be getting up close and personal in combat when fighting against this force. The Ravenwing Doctrine also gives them plus 3 inches to their movement in the first turn, and they can actually move even faster than that with the Hunt. This is a stratagem that effectively just allows for a pre-game move, but they must end over 9 inches away. However, they then get their movement phase also, so if they can get to just over 9 inches away, they will be perfectly happy to move in, and if they can actually make a charge turn 1, they can also pay some more CP to then fall out of combat before that unit is able to be hit back. So they can effectively move across the board turn 1, get into combat, do some damage and fall back out of combat. And the movement shenanigans don't quite stop there, because they also have access to full throttle. This is a stratagem that can only be used if that unit has advanced, and then that unit definitely can't shoot or do any charges that turn, but it does mean that they're going to get some extra movement. So this will mean that if they need to late game, for example, shoot across a board to get an objective, they can do that. And then the final stratagem I'm just going to mention for Ravenwing is Stasis Shell, and this can be used on Black Knights or characters that have an Astartes grenade launcher, and that means they make one attack with that weapon, and if it hits, the unit that's hit can then not fall back in their next turn. And then Ravenwing and Deathwing have their own specific warlord traits if they'd like. So they have lightning fast reactions with the Ravenwing, which is a -1 to hit, and they have Master of Maneuver, and this means that they can fall back and shoot or charge, but not both. And then the Ravenwing specific relic I wanted to mention is the Reliquary of Repentant, and this gives them a 3-inch aura of changing enemy invulnerable saves to a 5-up invuln if the invuln is a 4-up or better, and so this is going to be absolutely devastating versus the few armies in the game still relying on 3-up invulns and all of the armies that rely on a 4-up invuln. And then let's move on then to Deathwing, arguably not the best of the 3 wings, but I think certainly the thing that gives people nightmares the most, because the Inner Circle ability that they all get if they're Dark Angels grants them permanent transhuman physiology, which means they can only be wounded on a 4 to 6. It does come with a couple of stipulations, however, so you can't fall back from fallen units at all, and you can't fall back from any units unless you roll under or equal to your leadership. The other benefit to Inner Circle is that it does make them immune to morale, which is nice, but it's that permanent transhuman that really scares people, especially when you're going to see that stacked with a Deathwing Ancient having the Pennant of Remembrance, and this means that a Deathwing Infantry Corps unit gets -1 to damage taken, so they can have one big blob of Deathwing, and it's going to be incredibly tough to shift. So this is on Terminators and Blade Guard. It's also worth noting that Dark Angels players can also make their Deathwing Terminators OBSEC and their Ravenwing Bikes and Outriders OBSEC either from the Dark Angels specific rules or from the Space Marines, relics and warlord traits. And there are of course some Deathwing specific stratagems, so they can get +1 to wound when shooting if they're shooting a Deathwing unit that has deep struck that turn, and Deathwing Knights can also get +1 to wound in combat and an extra AP, and this can be on some pretty great weapons already. So the Knight Master or the Sergeant has a Flail of the Unforgiven, and this has spillover damage, so the extra damage will kill further models, and the normal Deathwing Knights have Maces of Absolution, and these are basically Thunder Hammers but without the -1 to hit. So instead of their Thunder Hammers hitting on 4s, they're actually hitting on 2s. And if they couldn't get any more killy, they're going to get buffed even further in the Assault Doctrine, where they get access to reroll wounds versus characters and models with 8 or more wounds. And then let's move on then to the specific warlord traits for Deathwing. So they get a -1 damage on a unit, and they have access to Watched. And Watched is pretty situational, but it's so good, I would still take it quite a lot of the time. It means that you can deny any psychic power. You don't have to be within 24 inches to do this. You can just deny any psychic power once per game. There are some armies that really rely on their double move or their extra defensibility or things like Doom, so you can use this to really cripple an army or force them to not make certain plays that they would have to make otherwise. So this is going to be something that's really difficult to play around. And so because they're going to take away all of that psychic might, the Dark Angels will very kindly bring a lot of it to the field. So they have an incredibly strong psychic tree. So they have access to Mind Worm. This does a mortal wound, but it also makes a unit fight last. They have Aversion, which is -1 attack and -1 from attack rolls. They have Engulfing Fear. This is -1 leadership, but they also then don't get objectives secured, and it can actually stop units from performing actions. And then they have Mind Wipe, which can turn off a single aura ability. And then last but not least, I really like Righteous Repugnance, because this can give you reroll hits and wounds in combat. All of those are pretty incredible, so you're definitely going to be seeing Ezekiel or just another Chief Librarian, maybe even 2 Librarians in many Dark Angels lists, especially when you consider that all Librarians in Dark Angels forces have that Inner Circle ability, so they all have permanent transhuman. So let's move on then to the characters, who I left to the end because they can be a little bit confusing, because although a lot of these you might think are Greenwing and even wear green, pretty much all of these characters do have the Inner Circle keyword because they've risen through the ranks far enough to get these rules. And so actually a lot of the Greenwing characters are still going to get those Inner Circle rules, so they're still going to be getting those reroll wounds, they're still going to be getting that permanent transhuman, and so I didn't want that to confuse people. So let's start off then with Azrael. Azrael has a whole host of buffs. He is a chapter master, he gives you 2 CP, but the main thing he gives is a bubble of a 4-up invuln for infantry and bikers, and this is going to be really strong on that Deathwing unit that we already mentioned that is incredibly hard to kill. Now, Azrael has a Watcher in the Dark, and the Deathwing Terminators and Deathwing Knights can take a Watcher in the Dark for 5 points, and if they do so, that Watcher in the Dark allows them to try to deny the Witch once per game, and if that power was cast from a Chaos Psyker, they can actually re-roll that Deny the Witch test. So if they're taking the Terminators, they're probably just going to chuck one of those in. Belial and Samael both have great output, and Samael is actually really fast, but they also both count as chapter masters for their respective wings, so they're still going to give full rerolls to hit. And then let's talk about the Ravenwing Talon Master. So he actually does count as a lieutenant, that's essentially what he is, but he also can allow Ravenwing units nearby to ignore cover when shooting against one particular enemy unit that it can see. And the other thing about Ravenwing Talon Masters is they are one of the only characters in the game that has considerable fire output and yet can be screened. And so even if your opponent isn't taking a heavy Ravenwing list, they might just take some Talon Masters, sit them behind that Deathwing wall and just shoot you without getting shot back, and then later in the game they can jump around and score objectives and such. And the Ravenwing Talon Master can actually get even better with Arbiter's Gaze, and this means that they always hit on 2s and they ignore cover. And when I say they always hit on 2s, that includes Overwatch. So if you're going to try and charge one of those things, it's going to be really difficult. And then Ezekiel, the Chief Librarian of the Dark Angels, does get a +1 to cast, but only for the Dark Angels' specific powers, and he also gives a 6-inch aura of +1 attack, but this doesn't stack with Shock Assault. However, those Deathwing Terminators are perfectly happy to be sitting in combat for many rounds, so it could still get some good use. The Dark Angels have their own version of the Chaplain, the Interrogator Chaplain, who's there to torture people. He also has slightly better stats over the normal Chaplain, and he has an aura for 6 inches where units will count as below half strength for the purposes of morale. That can be quite useful, but one of the main things he brings is access to further weapons options, and the thing that's scaring people right now is he can take the Chainsword, which means he can take the Teeth of Terror. And so when you combo this with Mantra of Strength, you can actually get all of those attacks at damage 3. So these Teeth of Terror gives 3 extra attacks. You can take extra warlord traits, so for example Imperium Sword to get reroll charges and +1 attack and strength. You could give him one of the Dark Angel's specific warlord traits, and so you can make him an absolute beast that can of course only be wounded on a 4 to 6. And then I just wanted to mention Lazarus, because Lazarus can fight on death. One of the few characters in 9th edition that can fight on death after he has already fought. And he also has a 4-up Feel No Pain versus Mortal Wounds, and gives a 5-up Feel No Pain to units within 6 inches. And so you might see him teched into a lot of lists if Deathwing players are feeling like their Terminators are being killed just a bit too easily. And I would be remiss not to mention the Ravenwing Apothecary. He has all the normal Apothecary rules, but obviously he has an incredibly fast movement on that bike, which makes him even better than normal. And then I just wanted to mention the Deathwing command squads, because these are tiny squads of Terminators which can be really useful for winning the mission, and they can also screen characters. So they have the bodyguard rule, which means that characters with 9 wounds or less that are within 3 inches of that model can then not be shot at all. And the other unit I just wanted to mention was the Ravenwing Dark Talon. So he can drop a stasis bomb once per game, which does D3 mortal wounds, but it also stops that unit from falling back in their next turn. And it also has the Rift Cannon, which does D3 shots at strength 12, and then you don't take armor save. It just does 3 mortal wounds flat for however many go through. And that takes us through to the end of this video, definitely the longest of all of the Space Marine supplement videos that we've done so far. And that's quite frankly because this book is jam-packed with amazing utility that could really take you by surprise if you're not prepared. But I would say also do check out the Space Marine video if you haven't checked that out already for all of the core Space Marine gotchas and abilities. But thank you very much for watching this video. Please do like and subscribe. We'll see you for the next one, where we're going to go over something that isn't Space Marines finally, because we're going to go over Drukhari.